Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the Liberals' federal carbon tax is justified. We have reaction. We hear from Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder, who explains why her party is pressing the Trudeau Liberals to reopen the Canadian economy. And Lethbridge Police Chief Shaheen Medizadeh spoke about his plan to get the LPS back into the good books of Alberta's Justice Minister.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. In a landmark decision today, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the federal government's carbon tax is constitutional. Alberta, Saskatchewan and Ontario went to court fighting the Trudeau Liberals on the tax, saying minerals were provincial jurisdiction. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney responded to Canada's highest court voting 6-3 to continue moving forward with the federal carbon tax.
The best we can hope for is that the Supreme Court has invented a one-time only carbon pricing exception to the constitutional order. We'll continue to fight to defend our exclusive provincial power to regulate our resource industries that is guaranteed in Section 92A of the Constitution, which was a condition of Alberta signing on to the patriation of the Constitution back in 1982. Albertans will continue to defend jobs, our economy, and our constitutional authority. That is why we're not deterred in any of the other defenses of Alberta's interests by today's decision.
Joining me now to discuss this landmark decision by the Supreme Court is Franco Terrazzano, the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Franco, what will this decision about a federal carbon tax mean for so many of us, especially business owners who are already struggling?
It's disappointing, and there's no doubt that Ottawa's carbon tax is going to make the tough times tougher. I mean, we just heard of a report that came out that says Trudeau's massive 467% carbon tax could cost us thousands of more jobs in Alberta. So, at a time when we need the federal government to take its boot off of our neck, we're seeing the government laying on even more costs.
Now, many are viewing this as more of a tax grab to help generate more revenue for the government instead of addressing environmental issues. How do you see it?
The reason the Canadian Taxpayers Federation has been so against the carbon tax is because it is all economic pain without the environmental gain. I mean, look at British Columbia. They have the highest carbon tax in Canada. We still see emissions going up. We also have to take a global view here. I mean, Canada makes up about 1.5% of emissions. So even if Trudeau was successful in screeching our economy to a halt, a carbon tax wouldn't do much for the global environment.
That was Franco Terrazzano, Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining me from Calgary. COVID-19 numbers have been on the rise in both Lethbridge and much of southwestern Alberta. Our city currently has 508 active cases of the virus. Dr. Vivian Suttorp, who's the lead medical officer of health, expressed her concerns about the virus hitting our region pretty hard, including the new variant, which showed up in our region 3 weeks ago.
Those variants came out of the blue. They were not linked to travel. They were not linked to travel outside of southern Alberta. They just came. So we know that they came from somewhere, somebody else. So what we've seen in southern Alberta is the UK variant. We have not seen the Brazilian or the South African variant. And the numbers are updated, I understand, twice weekly on the Government of Alberta website. The last numbers that I looked at this morning were from the 23rd, and that indicated 112. The one important piece is that we need people to get tested. If people are not being tested, the numbers that we have are a mere tip of the iceberg.
Recent outbreaks in our city have included the Grandview condominiums and Sunrise poultry processors. Health officials say there were 764 new cases of COVID-19 reported over the past 24 hours, with variants making up 21% of those cases. The HF South Zone currently has 39 people in hospital with the virus. 32 of those are at Chinook Regional Hospital in Lethbridge, with 7 in intensive care. As scientists work to create a vaccine against COVID-19, a small but fervent anti-vaccination movement is standing up against it. Campaigners are claiming that the coronavirus vaccines will be used to implant microchips into people. A Lethbridge pharmacist, who's also a member of the Lethbridge COVID Prevention Community Group, wants to set the record straight.
We are getting too many calls, especially with the AstraZeneca. And sometimes also some people prefer Pfizer over Moderna, or some people prefer Moderna over Pfizer. So certainly it's good to do your own due diligence, but unless you are like a scientist or you worked in a active COVID research in an expert panel with any of the regulatory body, I would still listen to what the authorities say, because every guideline is made up by hundreds of doctors and scientists who did their due diligence research, and also by millions of millions of people who got immunizations. With a European Medical Agency, okay, like this is the official report from them, and there are 7 cases out of 20 million people got vaccinated. So that means including Saskatchewan and Alberta altogether, we will get just 1 person who would get blood clot. And it's still not kind of life-threatening, we would say.
We want to put the awareness in people that, you know what, you should get vaccinated and there are vaccines available. So why not go and as per your age group comes in, why not go to the book your vaccines and why not go and get vaccinated? So at least we can keep Lethbridge more and more safe. That's what is the aim of the group, to spread more and more awareness. And that's where we wanted to bring in a pharmacist as well, so who can explain exactly that there is nothing wrong in taking a vaccine.
As we've reported on Bridge City News, the federal Conservatives have demanded that the Liberals come up with a reopening plan to help save thousands of businesses across the country. So many are hurting right now during the pandemic. Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder says the lockdowns have been tough on everyone's mental health.
We're seeing suicide numbers go up. I mean, right now in Canada, every 24 hours, there are 10 people who commit suicide. We're seeing those rates go up dramatically in children. I mean, hell, this is not okay. We are not okay as a country. And you know, Canadians are begging for a concrete, data-driven plan that is going to allow us to safely return to normal. Canadians deserve that, and that's what Conservatives are calling for.
Catch the full interview with MP Harder, as she will also discuss how agriculture is fast becoming Canada's bread and butter. That's coming up after business news. Now here's a follow-up to a story we first brought you yesterday. Alberta Justice Minister Casey Meadows says he would potentially dissolve the Lethbridge Police Service if they don't come up with a comprehensive action plan by April 16th to address certain issues at the LPS. The Lethbridge Police Service has been in the spotlight recently due to recent complaints and allegations against LPS employees over the past few years. Police Chief Shaheen Medizadeh says that action plan will include 5 key pillars.
So one pillar is ethics and accountability. The next piece is leadership development. Then there's employee wellness and mental health that we need to provide to our employees. Database access is a big topic, so we make sure we have measures on that right now to make sure it's more controlled and defined as far as the use, proper use and communication, and also a communication strategy, both short-term and long-term, internal and external, to make sure we are providing the information that's needed.
Medizadeh says the LPS will present the action plan to Minister Meadows before the April 16th deadline. For drug addicts on the street, having someone there for them can be a matter of life and death. The Sage Clan in Lethbridge patrols the city year-round, providing everything from hot meals, a needed conversation, to even a naloxone kit. As Ainsley O'Reilly explains now, the group is working hard to change negative perceptions surrounding our city's most vulnerable.
Rain or shine, including days this winter below freezing, the Sage Clan delivered warm meals to the homeless. From Galt Gardens to nearby gas stations and the public library, the group delivers hand warmers and blankets. One integral part of their work is wellness checks.
And they need that safety, that connection with somebody to check on them, to say, hello, how are you doing? How are you feeling? You know, be safe, you know, and just to make, you know, just for them to see that somebody cares.
Just a simple conversation or just hanging out, having a smoke with them, you know, they open up to you, and that's really important for their mental wellness.
Just learn about people and their stories and their personalities. There's some hilarious characters out there. Keeps us laughing, keeps us smiling.
Last year saw a record number of overdose deaths in Lethbridge. In some cases, the Sage Clan arrives on scene before the first responders. The Blood Tribe Wellness Society recently provided updated training for when volunteers arrive at an emergency situation.
Those seconds matter. The lack of oxygen to the brain really matters, right? So a lot of times we have nasal sprays, which is our first when we do, and then we have the naloxone kits, which are the needles.
I'm glad that we're there for them, because without, you never know, they can die.
The nonprofit anticipates with warmer weather, they will see an increased number of homeless people downtown, men and women who they call friends.
Like everyone else, everyone that I know of in this world has struggled or is struggling in their lives, and really that's no different than anyone else.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
After Lethbridge City Council shut down another dry house or sober shelter from the Mustard Seed and Lethbridge Soup Kitchen, it appears as though the Mustard Seed is moving on from Lethbridge. Executive Director of the Soup Kitchen, Bill Ginther, confirmed that the relationship between his group and the Mustard Seed is over. As for the Soup Kitchen, they need help now more than ever.
The Mustard Seed has told me and told the media that they will be withdrawing, and they have. I'm not convinced they won't come back if ever they were offered an opportunity without all the zoning. And so, but having said that, we were in transition kind of in terms of adjusting to joining them, merging with them since October, November. And so the conversation was always about what happens when you move. We saw our support, our financial support starting to wane, not erode, but it had lessened. In the last 2 months, it's been about half of what we normally get. And that's problematic because we're spending twice the amount that we get in. And so we will recoup some of these people. It's going to be a pretty big task to let people know that we're still here. We are not going anywhere. We're not Mustard Seed. We're the Soup Kitchen. I guess that my message is we're still here. We're not going anywhere. We will still provide 3 meals a day. We just need your help to make sure that happens.
To donate and help the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen, be sure to give Bill a call at 587-220-8688. Another person has come forward to announce their candidacy for mayor in the upcoming Lethbridge municipal election. Now, he's no stranger to the media. Bradley Whalen is the owner of Cocoa Vanilla Galactic Cantina and officially filed his nomination with the city returning officer this week.
This city in 15 or 20 years could have 350, 400,000 people. But you have to do things like put in the bridge to the west side. You have to start building up instead of out. You have two major educational institutions in this city. Millennials are known not to want to have grass, not to want to have driveways. They want to live in condos. They want maintenance-free living. They're the people that we need to stay here. At the end of the day, if you want to keep paying for the programs that the city offers, the money has to come from somewhere to do that. So working on a strategic plan and putting it forward to the people and say, listen, we can have change. Change is possible. I know people are down. I've looked at the voting numbers. People don't vote in this city because council is always the same. They always push the same agenda for the same groups, and nothing new ever happens. And now it's time to make new things happen. And the only way to do that, to boost the numbers, is to give the people, the electorate here, the confidence that things can change. And all you have to do is go forward with new faces.
A group of volunteers for local pony club has made it their mission to bring joy to the lives of seniors who are feeling isolated and alone during the pandemic. As Micah Quinn explains now, the group met today in Raymond to offer pony therapy to seniors in need.
The Mighty Ponies and Minis Club has been around since 2017, and the group mission statement is to provide therapeutic animal interactions for everyone. The pony walks started last spring after the group brought the ponies to visit one of their founding members who was in the hospital at the time.
And it kind of carried on from there, and we started walking around town, and it just goes out and we bring out some smiles in people, and it just brings out some good joy.
The group says that seniors have done their part in building the community, and now it's their turn to be taken care of.
This is now, with COVID, one of their main events of the week. So they get to build consistent connections with the ponies and with our volunteers now. So it gives them something else to look forward to over the week when they don't have as many visitors.
For seniors in the area, this meant a constant stream of questions asking exactly when the ponies were coming.
It's quite enjoyment for old people to realize they're being remembered. and the staff behind it and the people that have all this, they're doing a great job. What really got me turned on is I spent 10 days behind me in the hospital, and one day I looked and there were all these ponies outside, and I watched one lady. The pony was sniffing her hand, and she cried and cried. And I asked her what was wrong, and she said the pony had time to come to her at her age. Well, hey, a lot of people need that.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
When it comes to feeding our pets, what's the best food we can give them? Is it okay to feed our four-legged friends scraps off the kitchen table? Dr. Ian Gibson is a veterinarian with ranch dogs here in Lethbridge, and he says there are certain ingredients in pet foods which can cause serious health issues for Fido or Fluffy.
I would say, a good quality veterinary approved diet, so meaning a vet has sort of looked over the ingredients and nutritionists have looked at the ingredients and they've deemed it sort of balanced. That's what I would recommend. There's been a slight trend in recent years to feed grain-free food, but there's actually a substantial amount of studies that now show that these grain-free diets are actually bad for dogs and it can lead to heart disease. So that's just something to bear in mind.
Dr. Gibson will have more on pet nutrition and where's one of the best places to adopt a new fur-legged friend. That Q&A with Jeanette Roche is coming up later in our broadcast. BC Premier John Horgan says more than 1,400 workers laid off from the tourism and hospitality sectors are set to provide non-clinical help at mass immunization clinics being set up across British Columbia.
We today are announcing a program that we put in place with 14 businesses across the province, taking advantage of that superior hospitality the tourism sector is so renowned for here in British Columbia, to make sure that we can put some of those furloughed workers back to work. Some 1,400 laid off tourism and hospitality workers will now be doing non-clinical staff work within our immunization centers. Our co-pilots in this endeavor are Air Canada, WestJet, of course, YVR, the Vancouver International Airport. Our teammates in this endeavor are the Vancouver Canucks, the Vancouver Giants, and of course, the Fraser Valley Bandits. And of course, community organizations like the Pacific National Exhibition, the PNE.
Vehicles lined up at a COVID-19 test at a drive-through clinic in Regina were turned away as the site was hit with heightened demand. The Saskatchewan Health Authority had been reporting 4 to 5 hour waits before it announced it was closing early. Regina is dealing with a huge spike in COVID-19 cases and has recently become a hotspot for some of the most infectious variants. Health officials have spent weeks urging locals to get tested. The province of Ontario is planning on spending billions of dollars to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, help small businesses, and to support families. The province unveiled a $186 billion budget that shows a deficit of just over $33 billion, which they hope to eliminate by the year 2029.
As the pandemic has continued to unfold, people have been very clear that they expect us to focus on 2 vital priorities. First and foremost, they expect us to protect the people's health, your health. And second, they expect us to protect our economy. That is exactly what this budget does. Ontario's total response to COVID-19 is now $51 billion. And this next phase of Ontario's action plan makes good on the Premier's simple promise to the people: we will do whatever it takes to keep you safe.
I was talking to my kids in southwestern Ontario yesterday, and they've been enjoying some beautiful, mild temperatures. As for our region, it was much cooler in Lethbridge today as we saw more of the white stuff and hovered somewhere around the freezing mark. Fortunately, it should be much nicer for the weekend. A full look at the weather picture is coming up. Well, it felt more like winter again today in southwestern Alberta. We had a light dusting of snow and cooler temperatures. Jeanette Roche is back with a look at the long-range forecast. Jeanette, those cooler temperatures should be leaving us by the weekend?
Yeah, well, it's been quite a week, hasn't it, between rain and snow, and then we're going to be up to plus temperatures in the teens this weekend before it snows again. We're kind of just all over the place. So into this evening, overnight low of -4, we could see a 30% chance of some flurries as well as periods of snow into tomorrow morning on Friday. That snow should lighten up a little bit in the afternoon, high of 8 degrees tomorrow. Then we're going to see some teen temperatures, 13 the high on Saturday with a mix of sun and cloud. A beautiful 17 degrees on Sunday, but then overnight on Sunday night, we're going to be seeing a chance of showers. Those showers are going to turn into flurries possibly on Monday. We're going to drop quite a bit in temperature. That temperature is going to plunge to -1 and then back up to 3 degrees on Tuesday and then up to 10 on Wednesday. So we're just kind of doing that yo-yo effect. This is the time of year that happens. For the most part, we're staying above the seasonal averages. So 8 being the high temperature, -5 being the average low. 20 was our high temperature back in 1999, and in 1955 it was a chilly -27. Sun rose this morning at 7:23 a.m. and 7:51 is when the sun will be setting this evening. Looking to the rest of the country, what are our highs for tomorrow? We're looking at the west coast where it's going to be not so bad at all. 12 degrees in Victoria, mix of sun and cloud. Vancouver as well, seeing a high of 11 degrees. Both Edmonton and Calgary seeing periods of snow overnight this evening and developing into tomorrow morning as well before clearing up tomorrow afternoon. High of 5 in Calgary and 6 in Edmonton tomorrow. Not a bad day across Saskatchewan tomorrow. 1 degree expected to be the high in Saskatoon and 2 in Regina, both of those cities, mix of sun and cloud. Showers expected tomorrow in Winnipeg, possibly 60 km/h winds as well. Quite a bit of rain, lots of precipitation happening over here in central Canada. Toronto seeing 10 millimeters of rain tomorrow. Ottawa 15 to 25 millimeters of rain, a risk of a thunderstorm tomorrow. Montreal under a heavy rain warning in effect for tomorrow. 30 millimeters of rain is what they are expecting. Precipitation also expected in Atlantic Canada, although not to quite that same extent. 2 to 4 millimeters of rain expected in Fredericton tomorrow. 5 in Halifax. A bit rainy in Charlottetown tomorrow as well, high of 12 degrees. And a 40% chance of some showers in St. John's, Newfoundland tomorrow with a 60 km wind expected and a high of 8. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather is brought to you by ColumbianDirect.com. Café Coffee, specialty coffee from our family to yours.
A small business lobby group is disappointed in Canada's highest court ruling that the federal carbon tax is constitutional. The Supreme Court of Canada rejected a challenge of the carbon tax by Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. The Greenhouse Gas Polluting Pricing Act sets a minimum price on carbon emissions in provinces that do not have equivalent provincial prices. But the Canadian Federation of Independent Business says small firms cannot afford a further increase in their overall tax burden. An Alberta oil and gas industry expert says the Supreme Court's ruling that the federal carbon tax is constitutional raises questions about Canada's ability to compete with energy producers around the world. Richard Masson from the U of C's School of Public Policy says it's a major shift in power to Ottawa from the provinces which have the most expertise in regulating and understanding the industry. He says if the price on carbon is too high, it'll allow producers in countries with lower standards to grab market share away from Canadian companies. BRP has unveiled plans to offer new electric versions of its recreational vehicles by the end of 2026. The Montreal-based company says it will invest $300 million towards the initiative over the next 5 years. The announcement came as the maker of Ski-Doo and Sea-Doos reported a fourth quarter profit of just over $264 million. That is more than double compared with a year earlier. Since the start of the pandemic, BRP's stock has more than quadrupled as demand for RVs has soared. The former president of Empire Company and the son of Sobeys grocery store founder has died. Donald Sobey was 86 years old. Michael Medline, who's CEO of Empire and its wholly owned subsidiary Sobeys, says the companies are indebted to him for his leadership, business acumen, and passion. Sobey was also the brainchild behind the Sobey Art Award for Canadian Contemporary Art, given annually since 2002. Sobey is survived by his wife Beth, his 3 children, and 5 grandchildren. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 22 points on the day to finish at 18,651. The Dow was up 199 points to 32,619. The S&P 500 was up 20 points to 3910, and the Nasdaq was up 15 points to 12,978. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 287 to 58.31 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 5 cents to 257 US. Gold was up 13 cents to 17.2706 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 25.06 US an ounce. Wheat is at $305 per metric ton, barley's at $315, canola's at $7.81, and corn is at $331 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 43 cents to $119.55. Feeder cattle were up 38 cents to $136.15. And lean hogs were up $1.90 to $99.68. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 79.29 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, in a landmark 6-3 vote today, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the federal government's carbon tax is constitutional. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario went to court fighting the Trudeau Liberals on the tax, saying minerals were provincial jurisdiction. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says our province will continue to do its part to secure a strong future for our energy sector while supporting that industry in reducing emissions. Coming up, an interview with Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder, who explains why the federal Conservatives are pressing the Trudeau Liberals to reopen the Canadian economy as soon as possible. The federal Liberals announced the highly anticipated or perhaps dreaded budget will be coming out on April the 19th. We should see how many billions of dollars have been spent during the pandemic. To discuss this in more detail is Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder joining me from Ottawa. Rachel, billions have been spent, but billions more need to be spent to help businesses survive right now.
Well, hell, that's one opinion. The other one is perhaps we could let industry leaders do what they do best, and that is, of course, put forward creative ideas, be innovative, be entrepreneurial, and roll a profit. As a result of that, of course, it provides jobs, and it meets consumer demand, which I think is ultimately really great for our economy and gets the ball rolling again.
So what do you think of all of the money that the Trudeau Liberals have been spending, the taxpayers' dollars so far during the pandemic?
At first, when the pandemic became a reality, parliamentarians agreed to shutting down Parliament for 2 weeks. I'll note that it's 53 weeks later. And we wanted to give time for the federal government, the Liberals, to come up with a plan and to be able to move forward with that. Unfortunately, we still don't have that plan. But initially, they asked to be able to roll out some money in order to help Canadians who were finding themselves in a really difficult situation. And of course they were in a difficult situation. They were forced to stay home, and lockdowns prevented them from being able to work. And so when the government puts those types of measures in place, of course the government should also make up for that by providing some financial assistance. However, again, it's 53 weeks later and counting. There's still no concrete plan in place in terms of coming out of this pandemic and being able to return back to normal. And I think Canadians are desperate for that.
Yeah, your leader, Aaron O'Toole, wants the government to produce that plan within 20 days to start lifting COVID-19 restrictions, Rachel. That includes reopening the border to the U.S. for non-essential travel. How important is it to reopen that border?
It's certainly about reopening the border, but it's about so much more. Again, it's about putting a plan in place. I mean, we're talking about a data-driven plan that will serve Canadians well toward a vibrant future. And we just don't have that. And again, that was promised at the beginning. We were told that we were going to shut down for 2 weeks, give the government an opportunity to find its bearings, to figure out what was going on, to be able to flatten the curve, and then we were going to come back and put a concrete plan down on paper and then start implementing. Again, 53 weeks later, that still hasn't happened. And so we have, those who have small businesses, they're hurting immensely. We have individuals who have lost their jobs. In fact, over 1 million Canadians have lost their jobs during this time. But hell, the story is worse than that even. And that is to say that the secondary health effects of the pandemic actually have to do with mental health concerns. We're seeing them skyrocket. We're seeing suicide numbers go up. I mean, right now in Canada, every 24 hours, there are 10 people who commit suicide. We're seeing those rates go up dramatically in children. I mean, hell, this is not okay. We are not okay as a country. And Canadians are begging for a concrete data-driven plan that is going to allow us to safely return to normal. Canadians deserve that, and that's what Conservatives are calling for.
So let me ask you something. With everything that's been said and done, and especially now that more of the vaccines are rolling into Canada, do you think perhaps we'll see an election this spring?
Well, hell, look, here's what I can tell you. I can tell you that the Liberals are ramping up spending. I can tell you that the Liberals are really enjoying playing with the data. when it comes to vaccines. Most recently, they've said that they're now going to allow for up to 4 months between dose 1 and dose 2, which health officials have warned against. But the reason that the Liberals want to do that is because they want to be able to report back to Canadians how many shots have been put in arms rather than how many Canadians have been fully vaccinated. That number is very different, but they're thinking that it'll make them look good. On top of that, Trudeau is ahead in the polls right now. And of course, that's a prime time for him to call an election. It's sad because he's taking advantage of a situation that puts him ahead in the polls and would allow him to then call an election and potentially be quite successful in that. But it's at the expense of Canadians. They don't want to be dragged out right now when we're in the middle of dealing with a pandemic. They want this government to get to work and solve the real problems that are in front of us.
So it's safe to say that your party doesn't want an election right now?
I think that's safe to say, Hal.
Okay. Now let's talk about Bill C7 for just a moment here, Rachel. The Medical Assistance in Dying Bill, which received royal assent. What are some of your biggest concerns regarding the new MAID bill?
Yeah. Hal, I really appreciate you asking this question because I think it's something that's not getting proper coverage in our nation. This bill will forever change the social fabric of Canada. It will forever change the way that we view life and death. And so Bill C7 expands the legislation around euthanasia. It allows for those who have a mental illness to request euthanasia, and the mental illness can be their sole reason for doing so. Now, that's the result of an amendment that came back from the Senate when it was sent there. But before that amendment was even made, I believe that the bill already went too far, that it failed to protect those with a disability. Ultimately, as legislators, we should be concerned with the most vulnerable. That should be top of mind for us. And unfortunately, this legislation just doesn't do that. In fact, I would say that it makes them further at risk of being, mistreated. We heard compelling testimony from many, many, many witnesses who came forward at committee during during the time that this bill was studied. And those witnesses, who had a disability or who had a mental illness, they pleaded with those members of the committee not to go in this direction.
Now, the federal Liberals have been blasting the Tories, your party, over climate change. Did your party recently vote to say at your convention that climate change is not real, as some of the mainstream media has been reporting?
Hal, it's interesting because the Liberals have had more than 5 years to put forward an environmental plan. And the most they've been able to come up with is a carbon tax. And then on top of that, during the pandemic, they had the nerve to increase that carbon tax even further. I mean, that's something that's impacting everyday Canadians, whether you're driving your kids to soccer practice or you're driving to work or you're heating your home. Oh my goodness, how dare you heat your home in Canada, for crying out loud? Like, that's what this government's plan is in terms of climate action. Hell, look, at the end of the day, our plan needs to be focused on stewardship. So, as conservatives, yes, we are exactly that. We are conservatives of the environment. So, let's steward it really well. We only have one Earth. Let's take care of it. Let's put, practical steps in place that are going to facilitate a green planet. And I think by that, what I mean largely is we need to partner with industry. I mean, after all, we're talking about some of the most creative minds. We're talking about scientists. We're talking about those individuals who really have practical solutions to the problems we face when it comes to caring for the environment. As conservatives, we believe in bringing them to the table, giving them a voice, and helping us move forward toward a solution.
So your party did not vote to say at the convention that climate change is not real then, in other words?
I think it's important to acknowledge that that was a two-part motion. And so one was acknowledging that climate change is real, and the other part to that motion was talking about how then to solve the problem. And so there were discrepancies in terms of, members within the party had disagreements in terms of how that solution should be rolled out. The vote fell where it fell.
Let me ask you something. Why do the Liberals focus so much on climate change when we're still in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic?
Hal, that's a great question. I would argue that the Liberals are more full of talking points than they are any sort of action that would result in real change. For whatever reason, they've chosen that should be a significant part of their narrative. But when we talk to Canadians, when I talk to those who come into my office or who call my office or who email my office, when I talk to Canadians, when I'm walking down the street here in Ottawa, even, what the issues that are top of mind for them are their family, their loved ones, taking care of their health, their well-being. I don't hear a lot of conversation around the environment these days.
And jobs, I mean, 10,000 restaurants, a new study came out, a new report, more than 10,000 restaurant owners had to close their doors across the country during the pandemic. It is so sad. Rachel, ever since Derek Sloan was punted from the CPC, the Conservative Party of Canada caucus, many are concerned about the fate of social conservatives within your party. Now, were some of those concerns addressed at the recent convention?
Yeah, Hal, I think one of the important things to note here is that the Conservative Party of Canada is the only party that allows for diversity of thought. Now, what that means is that, we hold a variety of viewpoints and sometimes we're going to disagree. But you know what, Hal, instead of looking at that as a disadvantage or a weakness, I actually view that as a strength. Because when I look at Canada, I see a country that is pluralistic in nature, a country where we have people from all sorts of backgrounds and walks of life with all sorts of beliefs and values. And, I think the Conservative Party of Canada shows itself to be a place where those individuals can find a political home because we reflect that diversity. And so, yes, sometimes we disagree, but let's learn to disagree without being disagreeable. I think Conservative members are trying our best to do that.
Now, you recently referred to Canada's agriculture sector as Canada's unsung superpower. Now, you say that agriculture and agri-food sectors contribute more than $100 billion to Canada's economy, which runs up to about 7% of our GDP. Rachel, is this the wave of the future, putting more of our eggs into the agribusiness basket? Pun intended?
Great pun, Hal. I certainly believe so. Absolutely. I've talked about this extensively. I believe that agriculture is our way forward. Agri-production, agri-science, agri-tech, agribusiness. Like, this is the way of the future. And we happen to be so incredibly blessed in Southern Alberta, and in particular in Lethbridge, because we have all of the necessary ingredients to excel. We have great soil, we have great sun, we have great access to water through irrigation, and we have fantastic talent and labor. And so with these key ingredients in mind, and available at our fingertips, we really have the ability to drive agriculture forward and to really lead not only within our country, but I would even say on the world stage.
What do you see as some of the most pressing issues here in Lethbridge that we're dealing with? Obviously, COVID-19, the pandemic, a lot of business owners are struggling. But let's also talk about the recent report from Alberta Health Services showing that in 2020, 52 people in our city died from a drug overdose, drug poisoning. And across the South Zone, there were 102 deaths caused by drug use, or a rate of 32.8 per 100,000 people. The provincial average was 28.7 per 100,000 people. So we still have a drug crisis here in our city.
Yeah, and how it's so sad because I think what we have to first do is pause and acknowledge that these individuals are human beings. And they are people who have loved ones most often. And those loved ones are, hugely impacted by the overdose and the potential death that results. And so I think we have to acknowledge that first and foremost. I think the other thing we have to acknowledge is that, most people don't just stumble into a drug addiction. Most people don't choose that as their the thing that they want to engage in most in life. Most people, there's something else that happened that drove them to that. It's usually a coping mechanism for something absolutely devastating that took place. And so all that to say, I think, we have a responsibility then to hold hope out to these individuals. And hope looks like detox. It looks like recovery. It looks like, mental health services. It looks like really helping these individuals be restored to a place of dignity and purpose, and where they are, able to look at themselves in the mirror and be really proud of who they are and excited about their future. They deserve that.
Thank you, Rachel. Let's talk about federal infrastructure projects for Lethbridge for just a moment. What can we look forward to possibly seeing come down the pipe?
Hal, I wish we could look forward to a whole lot. Unfortunately, this government has promised a ton when it comes to infrastructure, and I would even say that they've spent a ton, or at least they claim to have. They created something called an infrastructure bank for building major infrastructure projects across this country, and they allocated $35 billion to it. But to date, they haven't been able to show evidence of a single project being completed. And so this is a problem across the country, and we certainly see that as a problem in Lethbridge because we really haven't received much in the way of federal funding for infrastructure.
Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Harder, thanks for joining me today from Ottawa.
Thank you, Hal, for having me.
Well, many of us love animals and have pets at home, but sometimes we may have more questions than answers as to how to care for them. Joining us today is Dr. Ian Gibson. He is a veterinarian with Ranch Docs Veterinary Services located just outside of Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News, Dr. Gibson. So good to have you on today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being with you guys.
Well, why don't we start with chatting a little bit about some seasonal issues for pets since it's spring now. So everyone loves springtime, but apparently pets can also struggle with allergies. So what are the symptoms to be on the lookout for, and what is the treatment?
So springtime brings a couple more allergens to the table. We've got pollen that's increasing, and that sort of can, if your pet does have a skin allergy, it can exacerbate it. And, pets typically want to sort of lick their feet. They often scratch their ears, lick their abdomen. They might sort of, typical to humans, also start sneezing. So that's sort of the type of signs we see. If you're dealing with sort of a skin sort of allergy, you might be okay to give your pet regular wash with shampoo, often a medicated shampoo wash. And if it's something more severe, you might want to consult your veterinarian, and there are actually specific products that we can give that can help with the allergies.
Oh, that's good to know. I know, like, we as humans often think of ourselves as getting allergies, and we don't think of the animals. The poor little guys get allergies too. I know I have a cat that often sneezes, so maybe I should get that checked out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I understand another thing to be watching out for is ticks, especially this time of year. So how can we prevent ticks from attaching to our pets, and how should you deal with it if they do get ticks?
So with the warmer weather, the ticks are definitely moving, and the easiest way these days to manage ticks they're just using a monthly tablet in dogs, and then a topical treatment in cats that also generally lasts about a month's time. And those treatments just prevent the pests from actually getting on the animal, and they can't bite the dog or the cat. And that's probably the easiest way to do it. If you forgot to give your pet maybe those treatments and there is potentially a tick on your dog, you can just kind of gently grab it close to the skin just behind the head, and you can pull it off.
Yeah, it's pretty nasty. I remember our dog back at the cabin at the lake when I was growing up, and some of those ticks got pretty nasty. So I know what you're talking about with that. Now, we all like to spoil our pets since they are members of our families, and I'll bet a lot of us actually overfeed them. So how can you tell if they're being fed too much? What kinds of problems does this cause? And what advice do you have for pet owners to stick to the right amount of food?
Yes, obesity is probably one of the most common medical conditions we see with pets, and rightfully so. It's not always easy to know exactly how much you need to feed your pet because they're not able to tell you. But the main thing you need to look at is, the condition that your pet is in. We generally say if you sort of rub on the side of their chest, you kind of want to feel the ribs if you press firmly. And that sort of gives you an idea if your pet is in a good condition. The easiest way really is to feed your animal a good quality dry food. And most of those manufacturers will actually have some sort of description on the back of the bag, and that'll sort of tell you exactly how much you need to feed your pet per day. It gets a little bit more tricky if you're feeding, table food and things, because then, it's hard to quantify how much calories are in there. And then you might have to use a bit of common sense to sort of gauge how much you should give.
Okay, any advice on what ingredients to look for in cat food or dog food to make sure that they're getting good nutrition?
Once again, the manufacturers that make these foods, they're the scientists and they come up with a balanced sort of diet. I would say, a good quality veterinary approved diet. So meaning a vet has sort of looked over the ingredients and nutritionists have looked at the ingredients and they've deemed it sort of balanced. That's what I would recommend.
Okay.
There's been a slight trend in recent years to feed grain-free food, but there's actually a substantial amount of studies that now show that these grain-free diets are actually bad for dogs and it can lead to heart disease. So that's just something to bear in mind.
Definitely. Now, we hear differing opinions on how many times per day to feed your cat or dog. So what is the correct answer on that one?
Most of the time, twice a day is fine, in the morning and in the evening. If you've got a little puppy and he's just a couple of weeks old, you might be better off feeding like 3 times a day. In saying that, a majority of dogs also do fine on once a day. There's not a real exact answer. It doesn't matter too much.
Okay, interesting. So how often should pets go for a checkup at the vet?
We would definitely recommend an annual checkup at least, and that's often accompanied by, vaccinations, deworming tablets, etc. If your animal is sort of towards the later years in their lives, every 6 months might even be a good idea. Things change a lot in animals. They don't live as long, so often things change quickly. So, yeah.
So every 6 months as the animal gets older?
Yeah, maybe towards the latter part of the life, in a dog, maybe anything upwards of 8 years. In a cat, maybe upwards of 12 years. You probably want to go for 6 monthly checkups.
Okay, interesting. Now, can you explain a little bit about parasites? What are they and how do they affect your pet? And how can we recognize it if our pet has them?
So we've got sort of 2 groups, external parasites, which we kind of already touched on. That's your ticks and your fleas. And then internal parasites are going to be intestinal worms mainly. And your pet can pick that up from just going to the park and sniffing around and licking things. They can pick up eggs, and the worms can actually develop in their digestive tract. So that's why we recommend, especially in the summer, to do maybe 2 dewormings. In the winter, you might be okay with just 1 or so.
Okay. How, in what way do they affect your pet? Does the pet act differently at all? How can you tell if he has it?
Sometimes a little bit hard to know.
Yeah.
Once the infestation gets really bad, you might see things like diarrhea as the worms irritate the inside of the gut lining. And some worms actually suck the blood out of the pets and they can sort of get anemic, so get a little bit weaker. Yeah.
Okay, so keep an eye out for that, definitely.
Yeah, hopefully we don't get to that stage.
Yeah, for sure. No, so what are the best types of treatments for these parasites? And is there a certain time of year that they come out, or are they just present all the time? It could be at any point.
Mainly in the warmer months, the warmer months from now on, October, that's sort of the main time that they'll be active. So you definitely want to worm your pet, probably twice during these warmer months.
Wow. Okay. Now, what about vaccinations? How important are they?
Well, they're very important and quite topical in this day and age with us dealing with our own viruses. Yeah, we recommend annual vaccinations, and then as the patients sort of get a little bit older, some of these vaccines can last for up to 3 years. We do rabies vaccinations, and then there's a parvo vaccine, and also a kennel cough vaccine for dogs. And then the cats also have their own specific vaccine.
All right. Okay. Talk to us a little bit about spaying or neutering your pet. How important is this?
Well, we all know that, all the shelters are overrun with dogs waiting for homes. So, the general recommendation, we feel like there's probably enough animals around. So that's one of the sort of reasons why you'd want to spay your animal. There's also sort of health benefits to doing that, especially sort of later in life. You know, animals often get issues towards the older years. You know, if they're intact, you know, infections in their uterus, they can get prostate issues. So there are some benefits with regards to longevity, which makes sense to do to spay your animal.
That's really interesting. What would the cost be for getting this done?
It really varies from clinic to clinic. You know, dog spay might be a couple $100, and you know, cat operations are generally a little bit less because they're a little bit easier, I guess.
Right. Now, I mean, sometimes we think of our pets as our kids. So if we are parents, we all know we need to spend time with our kids. So what about time with our pets? Does spending time with our pets improve their health?
Well, we definitely know that it improves our health, but absolutely, you know, spending a good quality time with your pet at least once a day is essential. They suffer from boredom, they suffer from loneliness, and a lot of behavioral issues that develop is just due to lack of attention. They are social animals. My advice would be, you know, rather than regarding you sitting on the couch watching TV with your pet for 4 hours, as much as you feel like you're spending time with them, they will benefit more from it if you actually spend maybe 30 minutes a day of quality time where you're absolutely dedicated to them, possibly doing training exercises or going for a walk where you're just focused on them. That's been shown to be sort of more beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Can animals develop habits over boredom, like overeating, for example?
They can, you know, if that's the only thing they can keep themselves busy with is eating, they might go down that track. Some of them develop other vices like chewing your fancy shoes or doing other things that you might not find helpful. So, you know, occupying them with things that you'd like them to be entertained with is a good idea.
Absolutely. We have a cat who's constantly sitting at the food dish meowing at us, letting her, like, we're like, well, there's no way she could still be hungry. So we're just thinking she's eating out of boredom, kind of almost like a human trait, right?
It could be, yeah. So, I mean, you could always get a few little toys. Cats like little feathers and things and they love chasing things. So there's a bunch of things you could probably try to keep her entertained.
Any advice for people who have to leave their pet at home alone all day?
Yeah, so that's a challenging, you know, aspect of owning a pet. You know, most people have to go to work. When you have a young animal, so a puppy or a kitten, they often can't deal with that separation early on in their lives, and it's important to note that, and actually try maybe go home at lunchtime, spend a bit of time with a puppy, and that way they don't develop this sort of anxiety of being alone. And towards, you know, once they mature, they're probably okay to spend the day at home, you know, alone. But you just don't want them to sort of develop this absolute separation anxiety every time you leave. So there's a little bit of training involved with that.
Yeah, absolutely. They're like little children in so many aspects, aren't they?
Very much so.
Now, what advice or precautions do you have for anyone who wants to go to the animal shelter and get a cat or dog for their child?
Yeah, so that's definitely the first place I would go and look. You know, those dogs are really waiting for a home, and there's so much of them that really deserve a home. In saying that, if you're getting a pet for your child, and you know, there's some other sort of considerations you want to take into account, depending on how small your child is. You know, a very boisterous dog might be too much for a little baby, and you might want sort of a more of a gentler pet. So I would probably recommend going to the shelter and maybe spending a day there with whatever animal you're interested in, going home, thinking about it, and then maybe going again and visiting it again. And, you know, it's a very big investment. You know, you're going to be having this pet in your household for the next 10, 15 years. So you really want to make sure you pick the right one. So maybe a little bit of patience before making that final decision. But yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, and I've often heard that it's not a good idea necessarily to buy an animal at Christmas time. I think the shelters are kind of saying that that's a no-no. Why is that?
I think it's, when people get an animal, when emotions are at play, it's much the same when you sort of overrun and you buy a new Harley Davidson and then a week later you don't really want it anymore. So I think that's important for owners to realize there's a large sort of sense of responsibility when you actually get an animal and they're going to form part of your life. A cat can live up to 20 years and dogs can live up to 15 years. So you almost have to think years in advance. Am I still going to have the time? Am I still going to have the finances to look after this little fur baby? Yeah.
Yes, good point. Think long term with that. Any advice if you have a newborn in the house? I had heard that newborn babies, and it might not be safe to have a cat near them. Any advice on that?
It really depends on the cat. Some cats can really play rough and they might scratch the baby, not out of bad intentions, but just playing. But you also get lots of cats, the most gentle giants, and they'll be fine with a little baby. I don't think there's any health issues besides maybe.
Maybe it was an old wives' tale. I had heard that cats like to maybe lay across them because of the warmth and it could suffocate them. So,
Not that I've heard.
all right. Well, it looks like we are out of time, but thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Gibson.
No, it's a pleasure. It was good chatting to you guys.
Thank you. Dr. Ian Gibson is a veterinarian with Ranch Docs Veterinary Services located just outside of Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.